What if I told you that the Jesus you were taught your whole life was only half the story? Not a lie, but a carefully filtered version. A version shaped not by the voice of Jesus, but by emperors, councils, and institutions who knew the most dangerous truth is the one that sets people free. Now, imagine this. In the year 1945, deep in the Egyptian desert, a farmer uncovers a sealed jar buried in a cave. Inside, fragile scrolls untouched for over 1,600 years. Among them, a book so explosive, so radically different, it shook the foundations of Christian history. It was called the Gospel of Thomas. And unlike the Bible you know, it had no mention of miracles, no virgin birth, no crucifixion, no resurrection. Instead, Jesus speaks in riddles. He says things like, "If you bring forth what is within you, what you bring forth will save you." The kingdom of the Father is spread out upon the earth, and people do not see it. This wasn't the Jesus of church sermons. This was a mystic, a mirror, a guide. And his message was clear. You don't need a temple. You are the temple. You don't need to be saved. You need to wake up. So now ask yourself, why did the church bury this? Because this gospel teaches that you don't need priests. You don't need guilt. You don't need permission to touch the divine. You only need one thing, to remember what's already inside you. Target, stay with me, because at the end of this video, I'll reveal the most dangerous idea the church ever tried to hide, a truth so radical, it could change the way you see God and the way you see yourself forever. If this already stirs something ancient in you, comment below, "I remember." Like this video, subscribe to the channel, and let's walk into the light that was never truly lost. The gospel they banned is the gospel written in you. Let's begin. Imagine this. You're walking through the Egyptian desert. The year is 1945. A farmer, just looking for fertilizer, stumbles upon a sealed jar buried in the sand. He doesn't know it yet, but inside that jar lies a secret the church hoped would never be found. Among the brittle scrolls is a book unlike anything in the Bible. It's called the Gospel of Thomas. There's no nativity scene, no water turned to wine, no crucifixion, no resurrection, just 114 mysterious sayings. Words spoken by Jesus, not to prove he was divine, but to show you that you are. One of the most haunting lines reads, "If you bring forth what is within you, what you bring forth will save you. If you do not bring forth what is within you, what you do not bring forth will destroy you." Pause for a moment and really feel that. This is not a call to belief. It's a call to inner transformation. Jesus, in this gospel, doesn't hand out salvation. He hands you a mirror. And in that reflection, he points to a forgotten truth, that the divine is not above you or beyond you. It's within you. The kingdom is inside of you, and it is outside of you. When you come to know yourselves, you will realize you are the children of the living Father. This gospel doesn't demand blind faith. It invites direct experience. It whispers that the presence of God is not something you earn. It's something you remember. So ask yourself, why would such a message be buried? Why would a gospel where Jesus empowers the individual be labeled heresy? Because it threatens the system. Because a message like this doesn't need priests. It doesn't need rituals. It doesn't even need churches. It only needs you and your willingness to look within. You see, if the divine is already inside you, then salvation is not a transaction, it's a revelation. And that is a kind of power no institution can control. But this was just the beginning. Because in another gospel, one buried even deeper, we find a woman who saw what others missed. A woman Jesus said understood more than them all. And the church wasn't ready for her either. Let's talk about Mary.
Let's return to a name you've heard all your life, Mary Magdalene. But forget what you've been told. Forget the stained glass image of a weeping sinner, the prostitute kneeling at Jesus' feet, because none of that is in the Bible. That story? It came centuries later, crafted by men who needed to redefine her power. In the Gospel of Mary, found in fragments in Egypt, Mary is not just a follower, she is a teacher, a mystic, and perhaps the one who understood Jesus most deeply. There's a moment in that Gospel, chilling and beautiful. The male disciples question why Jesus seemed to love her more, why he trusted her with revelations they had never heard. And Jesus responds, "Let her speak. She has understood more than you all." Think about that. In a world where women weren't even allowed to testify in court, Jesus defends a woman as the bearer of divine insight. In Mary's Gospel, she describes a soul's journey, ascending through layers of illusion. Fear, desire, anger, each must be left behind, until only the true self remains and merges back with the source. No dogma, no confession booth, just deep, personal transformation. So why was this gospel erased? Because it shattered the hierarchy. It said you don't need to be a man. You don't need a title. You don't need to belong to a clergy to walk with God. That kind of truth couldn't survive in a system built on patriarchy. To protect their power, they buried her voice. They turned a spiritual equal into a repentant whore. They replaced her gospel with silence. But silence can't hold back truth forever. Today, Mary's voice is rising again, in art, in scholarship, in the hearts of women reclaiming the sacred within them. And she's not alone, because in the ancient Gnostic texts, there's another female figure far older than Mary, one who embodies divine wisdom itself, a force of light the early mystics called Sophia. But even Sophia was cast out. Let's talk about the system that made that happen, and how under Constantine, Christianity transformed from a movement of awakening into an empire of control.
To understand how the message of Jesus was buried, you have to understand what happened after he died. In the beginning, his followers were outcasts. They met in homes, caves, under trees. They shared bread, they shared visions, and they believed something radical, that the kingdom of God wasn't coming someday, it was already here, within them. But then, Rome noticed. By the 4th century, Christianity had grown too large to ignore, and Emperor Constantine saw an opportunity. He wasn't a bishop, he wasn't a believer, not at first. He was a strategist. In 313 AD, he legalized Christianity. 12 years later, he gathered bishops from across the empire to decide once and for all what this religion would be. That meeting became known as the Council of Nicaea. And make no mistake, it wasn't just a spiritual gathering, it was a political operation. Out of dozens of gospels circulating at the time, only 4 were chosen: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. The rest? Declared heresy, banned, burned, forgotten. Why? Because many of those Gospels told you, you don't need an institution. You don't need rituals or mediators or fear. You are already divine. And if people knew that, who would kneel? Who would obey? Who would pay? So a new version of the faith was born, one centered not on awakening, but on authority. Sin became a debt, salvation became a transaction, and the living Christ became a statue to worship, instead of a state of consciousness to embody. But not everyone forgot. In the 12th century, far from Rome, in the mountains of southern France, a group of Christians known as the Cathars began to preach something dangerous. They believed that this world was not the creation of the true God, but a prison of illusion. They taught that Jesus came not to die for sin, but to remind us that we are light, trapped in matter. They rejected the sacraments. They elevated women. They believed in the spark of the divine within everyone. And for that, Rome launched a war. Not against pagans, not against invaders, but against fellow Christians. In 1209, Pope Innocent III sent his army into Béziers, a Cathar stronghold. When soldiers asked how to tell Cathars from Catholics, the papal legate famously replied, "Kill them all. God will know his own." Thousands were slaughtered. Why? Because they remembered a version of Jesus that didn't belong to Rome. And though the bodies were burned, the message wouldn't die. It went underground again, carried in whispers, hidden in symbols, tucked inside ancient manuscripts. Because truth has a strange habit of surviving. And in the next chapter, we'll follow that truth as it travels across centuries, through mystics, monks, artists, and dreamers, all keeping a secret alive. Not a secret of power, but a secret of remembering.
They tried to erase it. They tried to burn it. They tried to bury it under creeds and councils, cathedrals and control. But truth has roots. And this truth about the divine spark within didn't die. It just hid. Not in grand palaces or libraries, but in silence, in caves, in the hearts of those who remembered. Long after the Gospel of Thomas was buried in the sands of Egypt, others carried its light. The Desert Fathers fled the cities of Rome to seek God not in gold, but in stillness. They fasted, they listened, and they whispered, "God is not outside. God is here." In the Middle Ages, a German mystic named Meister Eckhart preached, "The eye with which I see God is the same eye with which God sees me." For that, he was accused of heresy. But he wasn't alone. Throughout history, the forbidden gospel resurfaced, not as dogma, but as living flame. In the spirals of sacred geometry, in the mandalas of the East, in the mystic tree of life of Kabbalah, in the swirling poetry of Rumi, in the silence of Zen monks, in the dance of the Sufis, the same message echoed. You are not separate. The divine is not elsewhere. What you seek is already within. Even in alchemy, where many saw only strange symbols and secret formulas, a deeper story was being told. Lead into gold? No. Ego into soul. Matter into light. Self into self-realization. They weren't turning metal. They were turning consciousness.
And in the 20th century, Carl Jung, the father of modern psychology, recognized this ancient current. He wrote, "The Gnostics were the first depth psychologists because they didn't fear the shadow. They dove into it, not to judge, but to integrate, to remember." You see, the forbidden gospel never left. It just stopped shouting. It began to whisper in dreams, in symbols, in synchronicities. It's been speaking to you too. Maybe that's why you're here. Because this isn't just history, it's memory. Your memory. And in the final chapter of this journey, we go deeper. Because once you've seen the flame, there's only one question left. What if you are the living gospel? Let's find out.
What if the story was never meant to end in a book? What if the final gospel was not written on parchment or sealed in a jar, but written in you? After all the texts burned, after the voices were silenced, after the temples rose and the truth went quiet, the flame didn't vanish, it just moved inward. Because the message was never about worshiping Jesus, it was about becoming like him. Quote, "Whoever drinks from my mouth will become like me. I myself shall become that person." Gospel of Thomas, Logion 108. This is not metaphor. This is invitation. To move from belief to embodiment. To stop searching for God in the sky and start remembering the spark inside your chest. You see, Christ is not a surname. Christ is a state of awareness. It's what happens when you shed illusion, step out of fear, and return to the truth. You and the Father are one. Not someday, now. This is the heresy the church feared most, because a soul awakened to its divine nature no longer needs fear to behave, no longer seeks approval to belong, no longer bows to systems built on guilt and shame. A soul like that becomes free. And freedom isn't easy to control. That's why the message had to be buried, not because it was false, but because it was too true. But here's the miracle. It didn't die, because you are still here, still listening, still remembering. That whisper inside you, the one that says, "There's more to life than this. I am more than they told me." That's not fantasy. That's memory. It's your soul knocking on the door you forgot existed. And now, the door is opening. You are the temple. You are the priest. You are the light. You don't need permission to shine. You just need to stop pretending that you are anything less than sacred. This is the gospel they couldn't erase. The one that lives in your tears, your breath, your longing to come home. The gospel not made of doctrine, but of remembrance. So ask yourself now, what if the second coming isn't about a man descending from the sky, but about the Christ rising in you? Because the truth is, you're not broken. You're not lost. You were just asleep. And now, you're waking up.
If this message stirred something in you, something ancient, something quiet, something true, don't ignore it. This isn't just a video. This is a mirror. And somewhere inside, you've always known.
So let me ask you one last time. What if the gospel of Jesus was never meant to create a religion, but to start a revolution of consciousness? What if his crucifixion wasn't the end, but a symbol of what happens when a soul dares to awaken? And what if the second coming is not a man descending from the clouds, but the moment you finally remember who you are? You see, the church may have tried to hide this truth, but they could never kill it, because it was never theirs to control. It's always been yours to remember. So if your soul whispered yes as you watched, leave a comment below. I remember. Let others know they're not alone. Like this video, subscribe, and share it with one person you know is ready to wake up. Because the veil is lifting, the gospel lives on, and now the story continues with you. Welcome home.